Hello everyone, Jaxn here. I hope you're having a Nat 20 day. I want to talk about a quick rundown, a ranking of different variant rules and house rules for 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. A quick guide to the assessment that I'm about to give. These are all rules that I have ran with or played with, most of them multiple times. If I haven't used a rule, I won't comment on them. So this is not an extensive review of every variant rule, and certainly not every house rule you can add to your 5th edition game. I'm going to go book by book. I'm going to catch a bunch of miscellaneous stuff at the end. If I have something in italics, it means that it is not printed in any source book. It's something that I made up, my friends made up, or I found on the internet. I'm going to give a short commentary to a lot of these rules, but I'm not going to have time to dive into every one. I encourage you to ask in the comments if you want me to talk more about a specific rule and my experience with it, and I've left up the images of some of the actual rules text. Pause if you want to read that. With the actual rankings I'm going to be giving, S means I think everyone should use this in their game. A means I love it, but it might not be for everyone. B means I like it and I think others might like it too. It probably gets the job done in some cases, but not every case. C means I don't hate it, but I've seen things go wrong, so proceed with caution. D means it might be right for you, but I've only ever seen it turn bad and I can't recommend it. But keep in mind, there are no Fs. I genuinely think any of these rules that I'm about to go over have their place, have the right people that they will work perfectly with. So bear that in mind. If I mention one of your faves here, I still think it's very usable. Lastly, I just want to talk about commenting on this video, or a lot of my videos in general. This ranking is just my opinion. I don't claim to have all the objective right answers, but I do have some relevant experience that I'd like to lend to you to help you out and make your game better. This is mostly to help out newcomers or people who want a quick tip on whether a variant rule is worth their time. If you've had a lot of experience with the game and you have a completely different opinion on one of these variant rules, that's absolutely fine. I'd love to hear about the good experience that you've had at your D&D games. Just keep it classy and respectful in the comments. Thank you. All right, we ready? Starting out with the Player Handbook. Feats is S tier because we all use it and we've probably all forgotten that this was an optional rule. Feats add to the game no matter what level of play you're at. S tier, moving on. Multiclassing, however, I can't say the same about. I have seen lots of players, kids, adults, newcomers, veterans, that have gotten confused over their bogged down character sheets because 5th edition is made to be kind of front-loaded. You get a lot of abilities first, second, third level, and then the later on you go, the more you get cooler abilities that don't have as much text to them. In general, I'm talking. So unfortunately, I've seen a lot of players wind up having a bad time with multiclassing when they could have just picked the right subclass. Custom backgrounds are great. I think everyone should use them. I'm glad to see they're the standard in 1D&D. It's an A. Seeing HP as a vital force, not just, I have a constitution, so I'm a big old hunk of meat that can take a bunch of axe hits, but that shonen protagonist kind of like, you knocked me down, but I can get up, and again, and again, and again. It's helpful. It's not quite a rule so much as it will help you out with flavoring your different fights, your different characters. It's not for everyone. I'm going to keep it at a B. A lightning round on rolling for stats. I think the standard way of rolling for stats is actually D tier, and I have seen some outright fights break out at tables, unfortunately, because one person rolled 3 18s on their character sheet and another person rolled 3 6s. Standard array is a way to avoid that and keep everyone on an even tier, but it is kind of boring, so I'd call that a C. Point buy is a little more exciting. The only reason I'm putting it at B is because some people, kids that I've played with especially, just don't want to look at that spreadsheet of point buy rules. So it can be a little tedious, but I think it's still good. I think it's B tier. A team roll where I rolled 3 6s, you rolled 3 18s, and we're both going to share those numbers and put them on our different character sheets the way we want them. This method has improved every game that I've used it in, no matter what skill level or age level, so I think that is an A. Inspiration is S tier. This is a great addition. Once again, glad to see that it's going to be in 1 D&D. Moving on. Using different skills with different abilities, I think, is wonderful and something that a lot of dungeon masters are still sleeping on. This is basically the rule that says, hey, my barbarian has a lot of strength, but not a lot of charisma. Can I use my strength score to roll for intelligence? Or, oh my gosh, not for intelligence. Please no, rolling for intimidation. And you as the dungeon master say, yes, you can roll strength for intimidation. It's a good option, just don't get too bogged down or let someone use strength for, say, an intelligence check. That won't work out and could ruin your game. It's an A. Carrying capacity is an A if you care about how much stuff your player characters can carry. If you really care and you want to run a more realistic or survival-prone game, encumbrance is a nice way to do that, but it is something you're going to be constantly checking. The math is not quite intuitive, so I'm giving it a C, but if you want that gritty survival, I think this is a good way to go. But finally, any game where I have just kind of not fought my players on weight and say, carry anything you want, I'm not going to say, but no, you can't carry 3 chests and 4 great axes. Just, if you don't make a fight about it, it's not an issue, and everybody has a wonderful time. S tier. We're getting into the Dungeon Master's Guide with flanking. I know I'm in the minority on this one, but I'm going to say flanking is a C. The games where I have had this in as a rule for both my player characters and my monsters, we have spent a lot more time trying to get positioned exactly right on the grid. If that is fun for you, then go for it. However, I think there are more exciting options to give your characters advantage on an attack roll, like a Wolf Totem Barbarian or casting Fairy Fire. In the end, I've had a lot of experience with this one, and I'm standing by the C. Morale, I went back and forth on. I'm going to say it's an A because while I don't think these are the most robust rules, I do think it is a good idea in general to remember that your goblins don't have to fight to the death. If they see their boss goblin go down and see that you don't have any shinies to steal, they can run away. Overall, I think this is good, but you may wind up adapting your own twist on it. Speaking of adapting your own twist onto this, me and some friends tried a couple times to make aggro rules so that our goblins could pick which player character they wanted to attack without the dungeon master having to make that decision themselves. Basically trying to program the monsters like a video game. Yeah, it sounds bad, right? Just decide who it is the goblins would want to hit based on how you want to roleplay the goblins. It's part of the game. I have seen people other than my friends try to use something like this to decide which one the monsters are going to take down. It's never worth the time. Go without it. It's a D. Automatic success for player characters is an S. Sometimes your heroes are good at stuff and they don't have to roll for it. Firearms are a B. I personally don't like my guns in fantasy role-playing games like D&D, but enough people do really like it, and I don't think it hurts very much. This is B because you might still have some arguments at the table about what exactly this bullet is supposed to do to my plate armor. In the end, just have fun with it. Don't get bogged down in the details. Explosives, however, I am going to give a lot more caution on. Imagine if every NPC and player character had access to the fireball spell without too much limits. If that sounds cool to you, have explosives and powder kegs laying around in your game. If that sounds scary to you, well, I think it's scary. I have seen games ruined by dungeon masters trying to be realistic with how much gunpowder is on the magical cannon ship. Proceed with caution, it's a C. Healing Surges is a D. This is kind of a holdover from a healing rule in 4th edition. It didn't particularly work there. It doesn't particularly work here, despite the number of times that I have tried to use it for different parties that didn't want a healer or different high-octane action one-shots. I'm sorry, I want this to work, but it just doesn't. It's a D for me. Speaking of different ways to do healing in your party, if you want for the action to keep rolling, you can make short rests 5 minutes and long rests an hour. This is called Epic Heroism, and I think it's a B. If that's something that you want, this absolutely gets the job done. If it's not something you want, then don't use it in your game. Gritty Realism is the inverse in that, making all rests longer. Same kind of deal. If you want to be gritty, this is how you do it. If you don't want to be gritty, leave it alone and never read it. The diagonal rule is painful. I really like it, you know, as far as my brain and working out spatial geometry, but like, it's just tedious. It's not great for your game. Just get on with it and let your players move around according to their speed. Disarming is a C. I think this is a really cool option, but as written, it's pretty easy to build a character that's very, very good at disarming your big bosses. Now, that might not be the worst thing, but it is something to be aware of. Disarming is a C. Try it out. See if you like it. Climbing monsters is an S. I love Dragon's Dogma, and I think that if your rogue wants to climb onto the back of the dragon to get 1 round of sneak attack damage and then face the ire of the dragon because they're climbing on their back, you should let them. It's an S tier. It really adds to any combat where I've had a player ask if they can do it. Try it out. Cleaving is an A. It's not a good feeling for your barbarian to swing their great axe and get a critical hit for 32 points of slashing damage, and they smack into the kobold with 1 hit point. So, how do you resolve that? You have them cleave into the next kobold and probably kill them too. It's a nice rule. It's a good option, especially for martial characters that need some love. It's an A. Overrunning and tumbling does do the same thing of providing your martial characters with options. However, these rules are a little clunky. I think if your table has a good time remembering like grapple checks, this is probably not too far a step beyond. But if they do have a problem with stuff like that, I think this is going to be a bridge too far, and it's better to just leave it alone. Hidden cover is an A. I really like dynamic combats with destructible environments. However, this does mean that you as the Dungeon Master not only have to keep track of all of your goblins and all of the spells that you're casting, but also every hay bale on the map, potentially. Find ways to help yourself out with this if you're going to do it. Maybe just say, oh, you hit the hay bale with the fireball? Well, that hay bale is gone, sure. Madness is a D. I wish in general that Dungeons & Dragons would be a little nicer when it comes to mental illness and the way it approaches madness in the game. As it stands, rolling on the madness table feels a bit like your character suddenly taking on bizarre and anti-characteristic traits, kind of like a certain dragon lady. This is a D. Lingering injuries is a B. If you don't like your 5th edition PCs being very, very powerful, healing themselves with a healing word and getting back up, you want to have some kind of consequence for a big hit in a combat, this is a nice little option. I'm not so much of a fan of how maybe brutal some of these disabilities are, but this one will vary. Try it out, maybe adapt your own rules for what it means to lose a leg in D&D, but I think this is a B. Massive damage is a C. I want to like this more because it's a lot simpler. It doesn't involve a whole table. However, I have been a player who has experienced doing really well in a combat, taking a big hit with a high-level character, and then because I rolled a 1 going to 0 hit points, and it did not sit well with me. Maybe it will sit better with you. If so, this might be an A for your table. In general, for most tables, I'm going to say this is a C. Getting into some different initiative scores, which there are actually a lot of options for in the Dungeon Master's Guide. And if your table is struggling with just getting combat up off the ground, I really encourage you to check out this section. Side initiative is a B. It's pretty simple, but it can lead to every turn being a big discussion on who's going to go first. That discussion can be really cool, or maybe you find it boring, so I think this is a B. Speed factor is a D. I'm not showing the full rules on this because this takes up like a full page in the Dungeon Master Guide with multiple columns. I think they did a good job establishing what it is if that is what you want. I've heard tables who swear by it, but then when I try to use it myself, or even when I watch those tables who swear by it, it always seems to drag the game down. It seems like you spend more time talking about who's going to go in what order than the cool stuff that actually happens in your dungeon fight. And I don't know, that's not what D&D is about for me. I think it's a D. For the record, I think that standard initiative works just fine and is S tier. I think that flat initiative scores, where rather than saying my Elf Ranger has a +4 on initiative, you say they have a 14. You can even say, I'm going to sit at this spot at the table and musical chairs it, so that now you get to go around clockwise and hopefully no one gets skipped. Popcorn initiative is something I can make a larger video on. But basically it is a way to keep your players and the DM active, because as soon as you finish your turn, you get to pick which player or which group of monsters goes next. Honor is a D tier or a B tier. Hear me out on this. This is presented as a 7th ability score, or 8th if you're playing with sanity. I've never tried out that one, and I think that as a 7th ability score, honor just doesn't work, and I have tried it. That is a D. However, I think giving a separate skill roll, aside from persuasion and intimidation, to check the honor of your character, I think that is a B. You could add it on charisma or maybe some other skills, especially now that you know you can roll different abilities on a certain skill check. Plot points is an A. If there was one thing you could take away from this video, it would be to try out plot points in your game, especially if your table wants to play around with collaborative storytelling more. This is an easy way to do it. Give your players plot points. You can even use inspiration points that you're already giving out. I recommend option 1 that I've shown here, What a Twist, where a player gets to step in and make one little tweak on a situation in or out of combat to change the story. And it really gets to show off your skill as a DM to adapt and improvise from that. Plot points are great, but they're not for everyone. I do think this is an A. We are moving on to Xanathar's, who has a fishbowl and reminds me that I need to hydrate. So, class flair. Class flair. This is not quite a rule so much as it is extra flavor given to you in Xanathar's Guide. Every class starts out with some. Barbarians, for example, have personal totems and tattoos. These are fine. It's fine. It's a good thing to add. Is it a little limiting? What if your barbarian doesn't want tattoos? Well, you can come out with something else. I do think it is a good jumping off point for your next player character, even if it's not something that needs to be in every game. This is your life. This is a section for creating a broader background in Xanathar's Guide, and I never much thought about it because I always have an easy time writing the backstories for my characters, but when I have had players, particularly clients, come to me and say, hey, I used this section of Xanathar's to make my backstory, DM, please look at this, I've always been impressed with what they bring me, and more importantly, what they get from these random roll tables. I think is a lot better to read than somebody giving me 20 pages of prose about their tragic anime backstory. I think This Is Your Life is wonderful. You don't have to use it, but please recognize that it is an option available to you. It's an A. Xanathar's tools are S tier. It's just the kind of rules supplement that we needed. Similarly, Xanathar's downtime has improved every game that I've used it in. All of my players enjoy a good downtime every now and then. Maybe not every session, but I think for every game, this is an S tier. And we are right into Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, which I know folks have some opinions on. I'm on the record as having really liked Tasha's, so we'll see how my opinions match up and differ to yours. I think that session zeros are an absolute S tier. Unless you're meeting up for like Adventure League, I think once you jump off from that and you meet a good group of people you want to play with, you should really be doing a session zero almost as a requirement. It's really good. The information in Tasha's keeps it tight, but tells you what you need to know. This is S tier. Customizing your origin is also S tier. I have had players relieved that this was available. Look, not every elf is going to be a wiry +2 dexterity. So, accept that and say that sure, the elf can have +2 strength. A lot of the other rules about switching around weapons or language proficiency I don't see used as much, but boy, when it is used, I'm glad that the player had that option. This is S tier. You should try it out. Custom lineage, on the other hand, see, I'm not a total simp for Tasha. I think this is a C. I was very disappointed by this. I want for players with wacky ideas about a fantasy race to be able to play them in the game, and unfortunately, taking the custom lineage and just trying to describe this fantasy race with just a feat doesn't quite get the job done. There are some rules for this in the Dungeon Master Guide, which I think are clunky and overwhelming, and I've never seen really used because any of us that have ever looked at it had said, that doesn't look fun. But I think custom lineage really doesn't do it. When I have tried it, this is a C. Changing your subclass, the rules provided here, I think are S tier. I think it's a wonderful thing that you should provide to your players. And honestly, I have seen a lot of very nice narrative hooks come into play because I had a player that said, I think my paladin wants to change their oath or whatever, depending on what class they are. You should allow this. This is S tier. For the record, I think that changing anything about your character is S tier. Let's say that your paladin has completely abandoned their oath and way of life and they want to be a hippie and live out in nature and be a druid or a barbarian. Sure, let them. Play out that session. See what happens. Above all, if your player is not having a good time because of something they put on their character sheet a few months ago, they shouldn't be beholden to it now or feel like they have to kill off this character to make their new druid. Let them change. That's an interesting arc to explore in the game. I'm not really putting a whole lot in here about subclasses, but I do want to address artificers because I've heard a lot of DMs and a lot of tables say that they don't want artificers in their game because it's an Eberron thing. It doesn't have to be an Eberron thing. This can be a completely, medieval monk that stays in the tower creating potions. This is an S tier. You should allow them. Guys, I've been afraid of new stuff before, but when I've had artificers join up in the game, the player was excited. More importantly, all the other players at the table were excited to have an artificer played with them. They're not unbalanced. They're good. Let people play what they want to play. Group patrons, I think, are a C. This is the kind of thing that makes me understand why some people don't like Tasha's as a book. There is a whole lot of page time and a whole lot of rules dedicated to something that I don't think provides a lot for your game. If anybody has had a really good experience with group patrons, this is one I would most especially love to hear about, but anytime I've tried it or heard about it getting tried, it's a C. Hint checks are provided for the puzzle rules in Tasha's Cauldron, and I am going to tie in a more homebrewy gut check that I've heard a lot of different versions of. I don't like this for the sole reason that I think these skills existing in the game, like insight and investigation or even history, kind of cover what you can do with a hint check. Still, if you disagree and you think you want that special gut check, fine, write it down, make it a separate skill that your players can be proficient in. But when I've seen this, it's taken a long time to discuss, kind of like now, so we're moving on. Sidekicks are an A. I didn't want to like sidekicks. I'm somebody who thinks that 5th edition player characters shine when they're their own little superhero. You don't have to have an army of hirelings like an AD&D. But once I had a group come to me and say, Jaxn, we really want a capybara that delivers us our health potions so our cleric doesn't have to, how can I say no? I pulled out Tasha's, I used the sidekick rules. They were actually extremely easy for me to use. When I passed off that sidekick capybara to the players, it was extremely easy for them to use. I recommend using sidekicks in your game if your players actually ask for them. If they don't ask for them, maybe leave it alone, but still, when you have to use this, this is an A tier. Monster Parley is a B, because I think most dungeon masters, especially those that are already using something like morale, were doing something like this. Oh, sure, you don't always have to murder the owlbear, fine. But I think that the rules that were in Tasha's for this just didn't explain it. It's a good idea. I hope that in future monster manuals we just have a little sidebar on each entry for the bestiary that says, hey, here's some stuff an owlbear would like, and move on from there. This doesn't really take its own rule or conversation. Tasha's hazards. For the Tasha's haters out there, I hear you, but for your benefit, not mine, I really recommend you check out this one section in Tasha's. Anytime I have tried to run a combat or an exploration and used an option from this big section in the book, it has made the game really stand out. These are great. Check them out. All right, we're hitting all the miscellaneous stuff. We're going to go kind of fast. Using potions as a bonus action is D. I've seen lots of people want to try this. It always goes badly. I wish it wasn't the case, kind of like with healing surges, but it is easy to abuse. It is easy to wreck your little homebrew economy. So many things can go wrong. Don't give your players regeneration. Don't give your monsters regeneration when they already have it. You don't need to drink a potion as a bonus action. Piety from the Theros book, I think, is an A. This is not for everyone. I don't know a lot of people who want to play a religious character, but boy, when they do, this system is so good at adding that roleplay factor in and actually giving them rewards for it in the game. I recommend you try it out the next time you have a player that really wants to play a devout paladin. The supernatural gifts in Theros are an A. I've heard of a lot of tables that want to give a bonus feat at first level. We're getting it in 1D&D, and the Theros book was ahead of the curve here. You can actually take a feat as an option if you don't like one of these 9. I've had people play with each of one of these 9, and they're all pretty good, pretty balanced, actually, if you can believe it. This is a good option if you want to add more first-level options in your game. Go for this. It's an A. The dark gifts in Van Richten's guide to Ravenloft, however, I cannot say the same about. All of them have a lot of text to them, I think, to try to create a better horror backstory narrative that is effective in one way. Some of them feel a bit like curses, so they wind up being imbalanced. They wind up being hard to keep track of. I still think this is an option, especially if you do want to run that explicitly horror Ravenloft game, but they can't stand next to the supernatural gifts or just getting an extra feat. Fear in Van Richten's guide, I think, is a wonderful little rule. Again, if you want to make your 5th edition characters a little more vulnerable, this is a good way to do it and have some great roleplay while you're at it. Stress is another good way to do this. It's very simple. If your players have something that stressed them out, they're going to take a cumulative -1 on their d20 rolls. If you're a fan of something like Darkest Dungeon and you want these adventurers to feel the toll of going through dungeons, this is an easy rule to add into your game and scare your players. Tactics check is something that I've heard from a lot of different dungeon masters and tables in some degree. Basically the argument of, well, my fighter knows how to fight really good, but I don't know how to fight, so I should make a check for that. I've seen it work. I think it's a sound argument. I think that there are already checks. You know, if you want to know how to fight an owlbear, the rules say you roll nature and see what that's like. You can roll Arcana to see what the wizard's all about. All in all, if this is worth the extra time to add a skill to your table, go for it. But I think for a lot of tables, it's not going to be worth it. Long rest requirements. This is briefly alluded to in our D&D books. I have tried to add on a system to say like, oh, if you want to long rest in the dungeon or in the wilderness, you know, you need to have 3 of the following: a tent, a fire, a buddy to cuddle up with. You know, I've heard other dungeon masters try similar things. It never really works. It's always just adding on extra rules that amounts to, look, if it's dangerous and you don't want your party to camp for the night, just tell them, I'm sorry, it's too dangerous. Move on. It's a C. Intelligence score, giving you bonus proficiencies, is S tier. Intelligence is underutilized in the classes and the skills of the game, so being able to say, hey, I have a +2 in intelligence, can I pick up 2 additional skills or 2 weapons that I'm proficient with, or I want to drive vehicles, it works out. It's improved every game. It's been a fun little thing to see what your player and their character find important to them. I recommend you try it out. More lightning round stuff. The boat rules in Saltmarsh are a D. Very disappointing. Not worth the book. War machines in Inverness, still maybe not worth the book if you don't want that adventure, but God, I love me some Mad Max action. The way that they make it a team effort to drive around a hell tank, I think is very good and can easily be adapted onto more traditional boats. Finally, though, if you just say, screw it, guys, we don't need rules for this, drive the boat like a car and give me a vehicles check. Look, it's a 15, it worked. Move on. That is honestly the method that I have found works best for me. Finally, we're getting to experience, and I'm sure I'll get some controversy here. Giving straight up experience points for combat encounters only is a D. This is a lot to keep track of. It's a shame if one of your players misses a session and misses experience. Yes, it's tradition, but some traditions deserve to die, and I think this is one. The Dungeon Master Guide tried to provide some rules for saying, oh, hey, social encounters and exploration can give experience points too. And we say, neat, how much? And it's like, it can provide experience points too. So sorry, that doesn't cut it. That is also a D. Checkpoint experience is something I actually came across in the Dungeon Master's Guide that I didn't realize I had used for some of my game, and usually to interesting effects. You can have fun talking with your players to establish what they think the checkpoints are. Maybe it's defeating a boss, maybe it's getting somewhere on the map, accrue enough of those, and you level up. This is a B. It's an interesting system. But I think that milestone is the easiest, just saying, all right, Thorin and Bilbo, you made it over to Mirkwood, so I guess level up to 3 now. It works out, it's quick, it's easy, it's the best way to include players that might have missed a session. So that is an S, it's my recommendation. And finally, I just want you to know that you are S tier. You can do this. Run your D&D games the way that you want to run them. Use the house rules and variants that make sense to you, and your players will appreciate it. Thank you so much. If you want more help, please give yourself advantage, give yourself true sight. Bye-bye.